He picked up the phone and argued for hours. This wasn't the plan. He walked outside and stood in awe of his creation. He wasn't ready to give her up yet. He knew in the long run they would all be worth it, but those above him didn't seem to think so. After almost 10 years in the making, James Cameron was about to say goodbye to his beautiful Titanic. Now, 11 Oscars and almost $200 million later, most of us know that Titanic was the most grossing film of all time behind Avatar, which is another James Cameron film. I think it's safe to say that James Cameron is one of the best directors of all time. Reason being, he pours his heart and soul into everything that he does. There's a lot more than just passion that goes into making movies, though. There's editing, casting, acting, cinematography, you name it. So many things go into that. Let's take a look at how that process works. Starting with film history. Ever since the first moving picture, there's been a really delicate process of how movies are made. If you want to be successful in filmmaking, you need to follow these 5 phases. Idea development, pre-production, production, post-production, and distribution. Starting with idea development, this is where filmmakers and company come up with an idea for a film. Edward Gaines says, every time we say this happened and then this, we assume a part in this ritual. We defer as well to the outside authority of events, knowing that they're not reality. We attempt to start at the beginning, knowing the arbitrariness of origination. They had to try to be original and organize their thoughts in a way that they think people will like it. Which leads me to my next point. Genres over the years have done a really good job of expressing their own personal styles. Noel Carroll says, people have personal styles, ways of being in the world that express their personality. There's some deep connection between style and expression. Style is often taken to be what manifests or expresses personality. All the decades over the years have done a really good job of expressing their own personalities and styles. Take the 70s and 80s, for example. The 70s was really big on Academy Award-winning movies. The 80s focused more on a generation different than any other. You don't see movies today like Ghostbusters, The Breakfast Club, or even The Goonies. Michael Makovsky said, a certain kind of movie got made in the 80s that virtually doesn't exist anymore. Jamie Neary also said that these days, with a few exceptions, Titanic for one, the movies that snag Best Picture nominations are not the same movies that rack in the big bucks. Take Iron Man and Slumdog Millionaire, for example. They both came out in the same year, and Iron Man won at the box office but was not nominated for an Oscar. And Slumdog Millionaire, no one had really heard of it, and it ended up snagging Best Picture. Which leads me to my next point, personality in film. Personality in film is the way that people express themselves. And people express themselves through film, but there's so many different ways to do that. That's why there's so many different genres and styles of film, which leads to pre-production, production, and post-production. Pre-production is where they come up with camera angles, they look for scouting, they scout for locations, they cast the movie, and it's also considered the most important phase because if they see anything that can go extremely wrong, they usually scrap it. Noel Carroll said, content is whatever makes it the film, and form is the way that whatever makes it the film is organized, which goes into production, which is where they actually shoot the film and record everything. And lastly is post-production, where they edit and put in the soundtrack and add special effects. So they have to organize everything and make sure that it's perfect before the last phase of filmmaking. Which in the final cut is the last steps are the most crucial in any filmmaker's life or any filmmaker's movie is when they show their masterpiece to the world. Because the world's reaction is what makes or breaks their film. Steven Spielberg said, I always like to think of the audience when I'm directing because I am the audience, which is so true because if you don't think of the audience and they don't like your movie, that's your fault. Which leads us to our last step in filmmaking, distribution. Distribution is where you advertise the movie and they market for the movie. They send the reels to different movie theaters all over the world to show on the big screen. And later, they convert the movies to DVDs so people can view them at home. John Hughes always liked to say, "I so desperately hate to end these movies that the first thing I do when I'm done is I write another one. Then I don't feel sad about having to leave and everybody going away." So in conclusion, like most things in life, filmmaking is not as easy as people think it is. Just by going to the movies, you don't get to see the hard and strenuous process that people have to go through to make a movie. But the people that do end up making these movies do it because they're doing what they love and they do it for the joy of others. And that makes the process a whole lot easier. Steven Spielberg said, "I'll probably never win an Oscar, but I'll sure have a lot of fun. I really do believe that movies are the great escape."